This fucking camera's on a bit of a cocksucker. You know, you can't center anything properly with this fucking thing unless you have it on a tripod like a foot away from you.
There's that tripod.
So.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Alright, so anyway, I just posed a question on Facebook, and the reason why is because that fucking block that I've been trying to advertise and sell with the 11.5-to-1 pistons on the CX racing rods I have. I'm like, well, it doesn't look like it's gonna sell. I've got 3 RBB heads, and I got a manifold. Let me just fucking slap an RBB head on there, VTEC killer it up, and boost it. And I was like, yeah, VTEC K24 head will drop the compression, so I'll be good. I'm like, wait a minute. No, that's not the case. The RBB head's not going to drop the compression, right? It's not. It's not going to drop the compression because it's going to raise it. It's going to be the exact opposite of what I was trying to do. Gotta start thinking about it, right? You know, the subject of, you know, if you buy pistons aftermarket and it says for K24, right? It's like K24, like the RRC pistons, 13.5-to-1 compression with the K24, straight K24. But if you use the K20, it's 12.5-to-1 compression. Noticeable difference in compression there. So I'm like, all right, well, again, bouncing back to, well, what's the difference between the heads if they're supposed to be all the same flow? What in the head is different? Where's the difference in the engine completely that makes up that difference in compression? So then I was like, well, the bore and stroke isn't changing there because you're just, the block is going to be the same. You're just swapping the head. And if the head has the same flow, it can't have the same flow because then there would be no drop in compression. So then I talked to another friend of mine who's a K builder guy. I'm like, hey, so what is the difference? And he says the intake ports. The intake ports on the K20 A2 head or the Type S head are noticeably larger than the ports on the intake ports on the RBB. So like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. More volume equals less compression, more flow. So that's the trade-off, right? The trade-off is you get more flow, so you make a little bit more power, but you lose the torque. I've already talked about that before. You know, so here's the situation, right? So now I'm thinking, well, that's an issue there. 11.5-to-1 compression on it, but it is on a K20. But if I'm using a K24 head on there, we got to see compression is going to go up. Now, it may not be the exact same because you don't have the displacement issue, but maybe even higher compression than it would be on the straight K24, just because of the fact that you have less combustion. The cylinders are smaller, so tighter spaces equal higher compression. So if I was going to go to assume that the 87 millimeter was still the same, and if it's 1 full point of compression, so then 11.5-to-1 would be 12.5-to-1, and now we have less volume in the chambers in the chambers in general because the cylinders are 86 instead of 87. So maybe like 12.8-to-1 compression with an RBB head on the K20. So I'm like, fuck, that really raises the fuck out of compression. And I was like, damn, well, that's an issue. And then I was like, well, okay, well, fine, maybe I'll just run it in a. And because the compression is considerably higher than I thought it would be, it should still make some good power. But then that started to lead me down another rabbit hole of another fucking issue we have, right? If the compression between the RBB and the K20 head is so big that it makes a full jump in 1 point, right? So from 13.5 to 12.5 using the K20 head. Now, think about the base model heads. The ones that are overlooked. The ones that nobody thinks about, right? So we've been thinking for the longest time that, if you put the K20 heads or the K20 pistons from the Type S into the base model, and you're using the base model head, that it's going to be 11.5-to-1. Now 11.5-to-1 instead of 11-to-1 because that little overhang that in the quench area that you have on the base model head that you don't have in the regular VTEC head. Okay, again, less space on the head, less flow, higher compression. So yeah, I was like, okay, well, 11-to-1, 11.5-to-1, great. But then you got to think about this. The chamber volume is greatly reduced. I've already done it side by side with the base model head versus the real VTEC head. It is noticeably smaller ports, very noticeably smaller ports all the way around. So if the RBB head is bigger flowing head than the base model head, and it's still has higher compression than a Type S K20 head, then what the fuck how much of a compression hike are we looking at for a base model head? So I don't think it's 11.5 to 1 with a base model head. And if the RBB head is enough to be one full point of compression, 12.5 to 1 instead of 11.5? 12.8? 13? I don't know. But I have the thought that because all the chamber volume is so much tighter, the chamber volume is so much tighter all the way around the fucking head, I think the compression from the piston swap is much more higher than we're thinking it is. Considerably higher. A lot higher. And now I got to figure out who the fuck has the real information out there, because if you go to look up for generic flow for the K-Series heads, they're all like 50.5 cc's across the board, which can't be. And then I've seen a couple places say that some of the K24s is 53.5 or some shit like that, but it still seems unreliable when there's such a drastic difference, a very visible difference between all these heads. Now I got to figure out what exactly we're going with here, because now it seems like a blind build, and going from 11.5 to 1 compression to potentially 13, that's a huge fucking jump, and you got to be prepared for that kind of jump if you're gonna, depending on what the fuck you're planning on doing with that engine. So now I got to figure it out. I'm hoping that maybe one of you guys have some information. If not, I'm gonna have to talk to the guys at 4Piston, see if I can't bother them and see if I can't get this shit figured out, or figure out a way to measure the volume of the head. I don't know, but it's one of those things. This is a huge little piece of information, a little nugget of information, and gotta get to the bottom of this.